So today I have Alex Morales with us. So Alex, let's start things off. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a second year right now studying electrical engineering at OSU. Born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and electrical engineering is something I dove into it because it's something that I realized as I grew up, technology was kind of my thing, right? So I just had this fascination with technology at its core level, more of its hardware than its software, but growing up, like building a computer with my cousin and all these different experiences I had, I was always just questioning, like people would hold their cell phone. I'm like, do you not question every day when you're using it, like how you're able to use this? Like our technology has come so far to the point where basically not one person can reconstruct all the technology that we have, right? It's become so complex that it's teams of people working on it. And I just always questioned like the complexity of all the technology, so I felt like electrical engineering was good for me. And I also have like a small passion in psychology. Something that I'm really big on is basically human behavior, as well as behavioral analysis, and just basically understanding people a little bit more on a social level. So that's something else that's outside of engineering that I think kind of encompasses me.
No, real cool, real cool. So today we're going to be discussing how you got your internship at GE, specifically GE Aviation. How did that come about?
Yeah, so that came about at the Ohio State Career Fair. Was the first time that I encountered them. So I had a lot of friends basically that had previous experience with GE in general, mostly aviation, and I heard a lot of great things. And after meeting some representatives from the company, I just heard a lot of great things going on. And you can tell when you're talking to a company the difference between, I know company reps are there to typically talk well of their company, right? But you can sometimes see there's like a thin line between people that are just there to say that it's a great company and that people that truly believe it, that put their life's work basically into the company. So I believe GE did a good job of that, and when I talked to them at the career fair, I could sense that, and that's kind of how the ball got rolling with getting to talk to them.
So you met up at the career fair. I heard there was like we talked about this before.
Yeah.
I thought there was really something that was really interesting. How did that career fair kind of come about? It sounded like you just jumped in their line, and
yeah. So
how long was their line? Let's start that way.
Yeah, their GE line is it's long to say the least. It's a little bit astonishing actually. I walk into the career fair and their line was so long it starts to go in between the tables through the middle of the ballroom. Like behind where other companies are in reps, you're standing in between tables because the line is that bad. For some reason I was just like, I kind of went to talk to GE, and I was like, I had them on my list of companies to talk to, and I kind of take a glance, and I asked somebody at the back of the line, I'm like, this is GE, right? They're like, yeah. I'm like, that's great. So basically, the line was that long. In fact, it was so long, so I got a phone call to get an interview with another company while I was in line for GE, and I took the phone call because I was so far back in the line that it's like I wasn't even in line and no one would see me, so I just, hey, yeah, we could set that interview up for tomorrow at 6, and that's basically, in a nutshell, how long the line was, if I could sum it up.
Yeah, so you're waiting in line, you're about to get up to GE, and then what happens?
Yeah, so I'm going up to GE, and basically, I've known you always do company research when you go up to career fair, and so I had, like, points that I had in mind with GE to talk about, and I get closer to the front, and one thing I didn't know about GE, I did research on the company itself, but I didn't know how they approached the career fair since I didn't talk to them the previous year. And apparently they approach it in the sense that GE does it by department. So when you get close to the front, they're like, all right, you should have in mind which department you want to talk to, not necessarily like GE as a whole. And so I'd known the departments, but I didn't know exactly which one. I was like kind of in between a little bit which department, and one guy is telling me that, and I'm just sitting here and I'm like, all right, I actually don't have a specific department in mind. And so one thing I'm big on is, you want to have specific research, not just like big things that anyone can find anywhere. And so I'm like, I have to dig into a department. So I'm getting to the front of the line. I pulled out my phone. I'm actually like on GE's website and scrolling and looking for a bigger talking point within the department, because aviation is the one where I was like, all right, this is definitely the one I want to do because it has great technical experience and just great people that I've heard of.
Yeah.
So that's the route I'm going to go. And then now I'm just digging specifically into aviation versus GE as a whole and like the department. So I had like small points before, but when I heard that they were talking about it in terms of departments, I had to like pull up on my phone, do like quick 2-minute research, dig a little bit deeper. It's funny to say dig a little bit deeper and it's only 2 minutes, but I found a large talking point that I didn't know about previous to when I was talking to them, and that was their Internet of Things that they have, basically their IoT. And my previous experience at Rockwell Automation made that like a thing that was available to me, right? If I didn't have the experience before at Rockwell Automation, I wouldn't know what the Internet of Things was. They don't teach you this in college your first couple of years. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, this is pretty good. And I just saw their entire process of how they're digitizing a lot of things and automating their processes. And so from my background at Rockwell the previous year, that gave me like a good talking point. So I went up there, and when I talked to the guy, that was one of the first things I brought up after kind of like my elevator speech.
Yeah.
That kind of got the ball rolling, because then we had kind of a unique conversation back and forth about that for probably a few minutes just on that one topic on their IoT. And I feel like that was great because it helped differentiate me, because I feel like your average college student isn't going to scroll in and see like, oh yeah, their Internet of Things and their system that they're rolling on this. That's not a common thing that pull away to talk about, right?
Yeah, so you did an introduction of yourself, and then you went straight into IoT. How'd you introduce that? It was just something like, oh, this is what I'm interested in?
Yeah, so I do my typical elevator pitch, kind of talk about who I am, kind of similar to how I introduced myself earlier. And basically, I got rolling, and I'm talking about how I'm interested in GE Aviation and position there. And since I kind of segue into working for the company and what I like about the company, and like the why behind it, I kind of threw in the IoT in there towards the end, kind of ropes around a circle, so that I didn't want to just jump straight forward and be like, yeah, you're Internet of Things. So basically, I just introduced the idea of me, like, why I want the position, essentially, which is kind of how a lot of people close their elevator pitch. They're like, why I want the position, which is some good advice I heard from some people and some friends that are like, when you go prepared for a company, it's good to know what position and why. So for me, the department was specifically the thing that came up a little bit later, but you always want to know why, and you want to tell them that, why you feel like you'd be a good fit and what position. So you're specific, they know you did research if you're looking at a specific position. And at the end of that, I kind of roped in. I was like, yeah, one of the things that stood out to me about GE is really cool is your IoT. And I just started talking to them about that. And that's something that we talked about for a few minutes. So just kind of introduced their company, why I'd want to work for them first, and then kind of brought in that topic a little bit later.
How'd you guys end the conversation?
You said, how did we end it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so after talking about that, and we talked about, he started going through my resume, typical career fair, they're always like, okay, yeah, and they kind of like try to point out experiences, and so we talked about my experience from the previous summer, went through that, and towards the end of the conversation, they typically ask, say if you have any questions for me, almost similar to an interview a little bit.
Yep.
So usually I try to have a couple questions just about their work experience, because one of the big things I notice is I like to ask the person that's asking me questions like about their job and about them, because I feel like that's also another thing that differentiates. It's not just about me when we're talking about it, although career fairs kind of are that way. It's the way it's supposed to be. They're trying to get interns and co-ops and full-times in some cases. So I like to ask a little bit more about them, because I feel like that throws them into a little bit different of a position. It's a little bit more unique, and they're like, oh yeah, they're interested in about me, not just about trying to get the job so much, because engineering is very much team oriented. So I want to go in with the mindset of we're a team and a possible team in the future. So I kind of want to get to know them, and it's also a good chance for me to get an opportunity to learn about their job and what they think of what they do, and an honest opinion of how they feel that they've been in the company, just kind of their honest idea about it. So that's one thing I kind of ask about towards the end too. And towards the end of that, that's kind of when we're wrapping up. Like after I have any other questions, such as like the work environment, I have a few other questions that are typically tailored specifically to a company. Then usually after those questions, I just tell them thank you and kind of close it out through that.
Like a question I like to ask at the end is, so you go to report is like, why did you choose this company, or why did you choose to be at this company? What are some of maybe the question that what's your go-to?
The one I always have to ask is about the work culture and environment, because I feel like that is one thing that you need to know about prior to working anywhere, because you're not going to fit in at every work culture environment. As much as you might think you want to work with a company, you hear things about, yeah, their work culture environment's very, like, there's different examples. One of them's like, it's very, just basically very hardworking, working nonstop. You might do a lot of overtime, like 50, 60-hour work weeks. And that kind of plays into the culture, and you have a team that's constantly driven around each project one after the next. So that's one example of a work culture. And not everyone is made for that, right? So that's one big thing that I like to ask, because I want to know if I'm going in. I mean, typically interns, not at all companies, but the majority of them do like your standard work time and work hours, about 40 hours a week. But I always like to ask about the environment because I know some are like, yeah, we have more environment that's very team-oriented. Everything you do is around the team. Some are kind of somewhere in the middle between that and individual work, so I like to know where I stand on that spectrum, just so that when I'm going into the company, that's not something you get out of. I also ask in interviews as well, but it's not something you'll know until you step foot in there, and then you get there and you realize, I don't really mesh with this environment. I can't really thrive in this culture, so that's something I try to get out the way early because I don't want to end up in an environment where I know I'm not going to be thriving, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So after after you completed your resume, did you immediately apply online? Did you apply before the career fair? What was the next steps there for you?
Yeah, so it varied by company. GE specifically, I believe, I do not remember 100%, so I'm not going to tell you an honest answer. I might have applied afterwards, actually, for GE. I believe they gave me a specific location to apply to.
Yep.
All I remember is I did a lot of job applications during that season, some before at career fair, some after, mostly because I know it's kind of all just meshed together in my mind as one, because some companies are like, yeah, you like even if you apply online, they want you to apply to something specific afterwards. So that happened to me a few times at the career fairs, having applied to a different position, more specific afterwards. And some of them I applied online beforehand a lot of the time, even though sometimes I'd have to reapply afterwards. I believe GE I applied after the career fair, just after talking to them. I'm not positive though, but usually that was the case, that some of them would be like, yeah, even if you applied here, apply to this specific location, so that might have happened there.
So what happened afterwards? How did that hiring process come about?
Let's see.
Conversation or?
I got an email about, I'm going to estimate, roughly 2.5 weeks later, maybe around that time, so it was a couple of weeks at least. I know it wasn't within the next week because there were some other companies that were doing interview processes and such, and I remember I didn't get interviewed with GE for a few weeks at the least, so it definitely took a couple weeks to get an email, and from there they go through OSU's ECS, so that helps out a lot. Just like a lot of the companies use the career services to do their interviews, GE is one of them in that case, and basically they just sent me an email and they're like, alright, you can schedule your interview through ECS, and they kind of use that process through OSU to make it a lot easier. And basically I was able to schedule my own time for an interview. Which was one thing that was really good. It wasn't like, alright, we have like a 4 p.m. slot for you. They were like, you can choose whichever time is best for you. The earlier, first come, first serve, basically, because there's multiple interviews, and if someone says 8 o'clock first, you don't get 8 o'clock. So that was something that was really good. They just sent an email, do it through OSU ECS, and from there you can choose a time slot, and that helped out a lot too, because then I didn't have to miss class or anything.
Was it face-to-face on campus?
Yeah, it was face-to-face in ECS.
And then after that, did you just wait a specific? Did you have another interview? Did you get an offer after that, or?
For GE, no, I did not have another interview. I got an offer, I believe it was roughly within about a couple of weeks, your typical average time window post-interview, and that's when I got in my job offer. It was about 2 to 2.5 weeks roughly after the interview.
So you'll be stationed this summer where?
I find out in about a week, actually. So GE does something a little bit different. They give you a location a little bit later based on basically their criteria for where they're placing their interns. So you don't find out immediately with the job offer, but it was a thing for me of some people are like, yeah, but if you want to work there, location is going to be your major concern as an intern your first summer.
Yep.
If you really want to work there, you take the job because it's the job that you want. So that's what happened with me. I was like, this is the job I want. I don't mind wherever you place me there, but there are specific possibilities. So I'm electrical, so if I'm doing electrical work, it's likely that I end up in some places more than not. So Cincinnati is not so likely. I heard to do a little bit less electrical work, but still I know people that were there, so that's a possibility. Dayton, Clearwater, I believe, is a location, and just Grand Rapids also, so I'm not sure yet. Could be any of those options, and as well as some more. I find out within the next week and a half, actually, I believe.
Real cool. Awesome. Congratulations. So yeah, that pretty much wrap things up. Before we actually let loose, one last question is for the people that are watching, an engineer that doesn't currently have an internship this summer, what do you recommend that they do? So for example, you're doing your internship your sophomore and junior year, and if they don't have one between that time frame, or between their freshman and sophomore year, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah, if you don't have one at this point, the biggest things I believe you could do is you're preparing yourself essentially for the next round of applying for internships and such. And if you don't have an internship and you're getting experience to do that, then there are other routes to go about that. One of them is research, very common route. I know a lot of people that find research within the universities. Talking to professors, which is very difficult if you think about it for a freshman or sophomore, because you're not in your major yet. You don't cross paths with your major professors yet. Like I, for the first time, I crossed paths with one first semester of sophomore year. It was my first electrical engineering based class, and so it's a little bit harder as a freshman. But if you go talk to your advisor, I know it would be one person to resource out and basically see if you can get connected to professors within the department. You might be able to find research opportunities that way, as well as ECS may be able to kind of direct you to kind of some contact points. I know there are people basically throughout the entire engineering community that you can contact and find around to get research. That's one way I'd go about it. Second option would be definitely to work on your own type of project, even if it's something that you think might not be so critical, but just kind of something you're curious about, maybe something you want to work on. STEP helps with this as a second year. If you're a second year, I highly recommend doing STEP. That is something that OSU offers that is really great. It's basically you get up to $2,000 stipend to work on a project, which it ranges from things. I'm using it to apply to take care of some funds for my internship, like groceries, gas, and all that. They do anything like that for internship-based categories to more broad things, like if you're working on a project that there's just some guidelines, but you work on a project to kind of just find out something that you're curious about. They can provide the funds for doing that for a second year. If you're a first year, I just recommend the same thing. It's about doing a project so that you show that even though you weren't getting experience your first year, you have a huge talking point next year. You're one of the few that probably said, I was curious about this, and I took on my own project for the summer and kind of worked on that. That shows a lot of great things. That shows that you're driven. It shows you're driven, shows your ambition and passion for the field, and I feel like that's going to differentiate you a lot when you come back, because you're going to talk to a lot of people. Not everyone's going to be like, yeah, with my summer I didn't have an internship or something, so I took on this project, something I was curious about. I feel like employers from the other end would be like, wow, that's something that really makes them stand out, because it's not something you hear about often. But I know that as I talk to like upperclassmen and stuff, one of the things I usually hear about is people are on project teams, so there's a lot of organizations that you can work with. Some do things over the summer, I imagine, but there's a lot of different organizations that can give you that project experience, and a lot of them are like, you don't need to know anything, just come in and we'll teach you. So for like electrical, there's IEEE as well as a few others that you can get involved in, and those organizations are great also, I believe, to get involved when they get that experience.
So not only do you have to work a silo by yourself as a project, but you can actually work. Sometimes it's always better just working within a team or a member. Because at the end of the day, when you work in the corporate sector, you'll be working in teams. So
it's nice engineering nowadays, so that's the way it goes.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time, my man. I hope you have a great summer. I wish you all the best, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye.